The ancient Sumerian tablets tell a story about the Anunnaki, the deities who played a part in the creation of humanity. In many common interpretations, these beings were another species of life, more advanced than we are, who came to this planet with the intention to mine gold. But there was a rebellion. After thousands of years of mining, the workers grew tired and bitter towards their work. And so, a plan was put into action to create a new species of life to take over for them. And that species was us. The plan of the Anunnaki was to create a more advanced race than Earth had at that time, to use for the purpose of mining gold and performing other laborious tasks. This, according to the interpretations of the Sumerian records, was our original purpose as a species, a slave race to mine gold. Sitchin believed that the Anunnaki's original intention was to use us to mine all the gold that they needed, and then destroy our race and leave the planet once they had no more use for us. What's amazing about this interpretation is that there are some incredible discoveries we've made in recent years that lend some merit to this story. As we've previously mentioned, we have the timeline itself. The sudden emergence of Homo sapiens 200,000 to 300,000 years ago is a huge piece in this puzzle. What caused this dramatic jump in evolution from Homo erectus or Homo heidelbergensis at this time frame? Today, archaeologists still have a difficult time explaining it. I don't want to outright suggest that it was explicitly the Anunnaki. Maybe it was a big cosmic monolith, like from 2001, A Space Odyssey. I mean, that'd be pretty cool. Then again, the tablets say it was Enki, so let's go with that for now. Now, here's where we have something really curious. And if you haven't heard of this before, brace yourself, because it's pretty amazing. Right in the area where the Sumerian records state that we mined gold, archaeologists have found what may actually be gold mines. And these ancient ruins are believed by some to date back as far as 200,000 years. Stay open while we go through this, because there's a lot of mystery here and even more debate around the nature of these ruins, and we'll do our best to cover all sides of the argument. Archaeologists, anthropologists, and historians don't really have an answer about how these colossal sites could exist back from 200,000 years ago, which is why many will debate that they're only 25,000 years old, or somewhere between those two numbers. The general consensus in the mainstream world is that they're really just an early human settlement and not gold mines. However, even if the sites are not ancient gold mines, the magnitude of these ruins, even dating them at their most recent date, throws a huge wrench in our modern preconceptions about the origins of agriculture and civilization, with historian Professor Peter Delius and archaeologist Dr. Alex Showman putting forth that they are a clear indication of an ancient technological and archaeological innovation long before the colonial era. These sites are known today as the Baconi ruins, named after the Baconi people who trace back to the early 16th century, despite clear evidence that these ruins date back thousands upon thousands of years prior. These ruins are a giant complex of circular structures connected by channels and suspended in an expansive web of agricultural terraces. If we assume these were dwellings, some suggest it could have held an absolutely massive population. I mean millions, which is unimaginable to think that something like this could exist so long ago. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Extensive electronic measurements that took place in these mines in 2011 have shown that the circular stone ruins are actually energy generating devices, using the natural sound that emanates from the earth to create strong electromagnetic fields as a result of sound amplification. The shapes of these circular ruins are specific and unique because each circle represents the cymatic pattern of the sound energy as it appears on the surface of the earth at that point. And just briefly, in case you're unfamiliar with it, cymatics is a word derived from the Greek chyma, meaning wave, and ta kymatica, meaning matters pertaining to waves. The study of cymatics was pioneered by a Swiss medical doctor and natural scientist named Hans Jenny. He was able to create a physical representation of vibration, or how sound manifests into form through the medium of various materials. This fascinating work offers profound insights into both the physical sciences and esoteric philosophies, and illustrates the very principles which inspired the ancient Greek philosophers. These cymatic images are truly awe-inspiring, not only for their visual beauty in portraying the inherent responsiveness of matter to sound, but also because they inspire a deep recognition that we too are intricately connected to the same complex vibrational matrix of reality. As we explored way back in Spirit Science 7, the particles that make up the entire universe move in these same geometric wave-like patterns. And so we see that at every level, the essence of cymatics is present. Now, let's pretend for a moment that these really are ancient gold mines, as many people today believe they are. It would appear then that with a deep understanding of the phenomenon of cymatics, that the Anunnaki were able to mine gold, or perhaps move it around, using the frequencies of the earth, and thus their gold mines were designed very specifically to resonate with the sounds of the planet, allowing them to do this more easily. We know today that sound levitation is fully a thing, and may even be a great key to flying cars in the future. So is it possible that these sites are an ancient remnant of sound levitation and like uses on an absolutely massive scale? Some sites, such as this one, are even more unique, having seemed to be constructed to very precise phi ratios. I know that so far we've been drawing all these miners with pickaxes, and we're probably going to continue to, but please know that this is all for the ease of telling the story for us today. To these ancient miners, they'd probably think pickaxes were a fairly limited and primitive technology. Regarding these ruins, the man responsible for leading the research on the electromagnetic fields of these sites is Michael Tellinger, who wrote the following about his experiences there. I have measured these spectacular energies and electromagnetic waves, and therefore do not hesitate to make these claims. The fact that these circles are all connected by the stone channels makes it very clear to any scientist who works with electricity or energy that the stone circle complex is a giant energy generating grid that was most likely used in the mining and processing of gold on a scale unimaginable to us today. From Michael's work, he suggests that there was a civilization living at the tip of South Africa, mining gold for nearly 200,000 years. A civilization which at some point completely and suddenly vanished from the radar. For those of us today who don't believe in the stories of the Anunnaki, we must ask the question then, what in the blazes were ancient primitive humans doing with all of this gold? What did we use it for? Keep in mind, the general consensus is that at that stage in human evolution, we were purely hunter-gatherers. It was not until 9,500 BCE that the 8 so-called founder crops of agriculture appear, and these ruins are dated significantly older than this. We know today that gold is a very soft metal, and not really something that we could use like other metals. Certainly not if we were so primitive, as most of the world's historians agree that we were. Critics often put forth against Michael Tellinger and his claims that these sites could not possibly be gold mines because there is no ancient artifact that we know of made of gold that exists before 4,600 BCE. Then again, if the Anunnaki were shipping the gold off to their planet or wherever, it would make sense that humans wouldn't be crafting things out of it anyways. It is most certainly an extremely unique puzzle, made even more amazing by the fact that Sitchin wrote the Anunnaki were mining gold in Southeast Africa way back in 1976, long before the discovery of these sites truly came to light. For all of the people who claim that Sitchin didn't even know how to read the tablets and all of his interpretations are all wrong, I pose the following question. How is this even possible? I know what some of you might be thinking. Michael Tellinger read a Sitchin book, went to Africa, and then claimed some old ruins he found were gold mines. And you know what? Maybe he really was looking for them. However, if we consider that he's correct and that the energetic and cymatic readings of the site truly do indicate these were gold mines, then it really does call on us to reevaluate everything we think we know about human origins. The back and forth between historians and archaeologists on this subject, and even naming the ruins after the Bakoni people, reminds me of the exact same thing happening around the age of the Sphinx. Today, Egyptologists stand definitively behind the idea that the Sphinx was built around 2500 BCE by the pharaoh Khafre, despite significant archaeological evidence, such as the weathering patterns on the Sphinx, that prove it is significantly older, at least 12,000, if not 35,000 years old. The way that skeptics treat Sitchin and his work, you'd think he was just throwing darts at a map, and wherever they landed was where he pegged the story to take place. But if those ruins truly are the remnants of gold mines, then we have to ask the question, was Sitchin actually able to read the tablets better than everyone else in recent history? Today, most historians believe that the Sumerian tablets don't speak about gold mines at all, and that Sitchin essentially made it up. In the 12th planet, Sitchin explains his reasoning, which actually has to do with Apsu, also written as Abzu. If you recall, Apsu is regarded as the aquifers under Mesopotamia, and Sitchin translated him to actually mean the sun. But after Enki took the throne, Apsu became a location rather than a deity. Sitchin writes, the Sumerian term Abzu, which scholars have accepted to mean watery deep, requires a fresh and critical analysis. Literally, the term meant primeval deep source, not necessarily of waters. According to Sumerian grammatical rules, either of two syllables of any term could precede the other without changing the word's meaning, with the result that Abzu and Zuab meant the same thing. The latter spelling of the Sumerian term enables identification of its parallel in the Semitic languages, for Za'ab has always meant and still means precious metal, specifically gold in Hebrew and its sister languages. The Sumerian pictograph for Abzu was that of an excavation deep into the earth mounted by a shaft. Thus, Ea was not the lord of an indefinite watery deep, but the god in charge of the exploitation of Earth's minerals. This is a very curious correlation, considering that gold is often called the royal metal, sacred in ancient times, and is the metal most commonly associated with the sun in ancient alchemy, and even related with solar deities. So we see Apsu written first as the sun, and then a physical metal commonly identified as the metal of the sun and sun gods. Wowsy. But you know what? Our discoveries don't end there. Let's now shift the conversation for a moment to explore one more curious relationship between what we know today about human history and the story from these ancient tablets. There is a colloquial mitochondrial Eve theory that scientists first presented in the early 1980s. By 1987, a publication by scientists Kahn, Stoneking, and Wilson revealed that the matrilineal source of our common DNA lineage dates back between 140 and 200,000 years ago. To be clear, the original nomenclature for this finding was Lucky Mother, but when a publication in Science titled The Unmasking of Mitochondrial Eve was released to the world, the name Eve stuck in the minds of the masses. Just to make sure there's an understanding of these results, they refer to a common matrilineal mitochondrial line, a common root of all humans. What's so interesting and why this research has relevance to this part of the story is that the first collective person happened to come from the exact same time frame and valley that humans were mining gold in. The latest research on this from 2013 serves only to create an even more robust data set to support the original date and region of mitochondrial Eve. Isn't it so remarkable that the original theory and still prevalent out of Africa theory of human origin just happens to point at the same valley where the Sumerian records say that it all started? Coincidence? You decide. Let's now bring ourselves back to the story, sometime around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, when Enki created humanity. If you're knowledgeable of Greek mythology, this part of the story sounds very familiar to Prometheus, the ancient titan who created humanity out of clay. Like Prometheus, Enki stands up for the human race when in conflict with the gods. Most of all, Enlil. The tablets seem to depict Enki as a geneticist who used some form of advanced technology to clone and create this new kind of human. There's even tablet images that depict a pattern that looks an awful lot like a DNA strand. Despite Enki's work, Enlil was still in charge of the operation and would command Enki to modify the genome as he required. Sitchin explains that the combination of earthly clay mixed with divine blood to create the prototype of man is firmly established by the Mesopotamian texts. We also see this reflected in Genesis 2, where Elohim fashioned Adam out of the clay of the soil, and he blew in his nostrils the breath of life, and Adam turned into a living being with a soul. The Hebrew term commonly translated as soul here is nephesh, that elusive spirit that animates a body and seemingly abandons it when the physical form dies. Interestingly, the term Adama, after which the name Adam was coined, originally meant not just any earth or soil, but specifically dark red soil. The Hebrew name for this color red is also Adam, which stems from the words for blood. So this name Adam employed a Sumerian linguistic play of double meanings. The Adam could mean several things, one of the earth, one made of dark red soil, and also the one made of blood. The Sumerian texts also speak of attempts to craft a perfect primitive worker, which along the way resulted in deformed humans created by Enki and the mother goddess Ninhursag, which you might remember from her other name in the Babylonian story, Damkina. Essentially, in an attempt to perfectly match the genome of their human prototypes with the Anunnaki, there were some mistakes that were made along the way through a process of trial and error. Ninhursag also has another name called Ninmah, and in one particular ancient story called Enki and Ninmah describes a bunch of awkward failures. In the story, Ninmah produces a man who could not bend his outstretched weak hands, one who could not close his eyes, one with both feet broken, one who is just an idiot. They also made a man who could not hold back his urine, a woman who could not bear children, and a being who simply had no sex organs at all. With each new failed attempt at a proper functioning human, Enki finds a place for them in society, often as servants for the king. Sitchin theorized that this story recalls the first phase of the existence of the hybrid man, a being in likeness and image of the gods, but incomplete in some ways, including sexually, lacking in quote-unquote knowing. However, they were still useful to the Anunnaki's plans as servants in some way, shape, and form. According to this story, for many thousands of years, Enki continually cloned and created new proto-humans who would grow up to become miners. However, these beings were sterile. They could not reproduce. During the period in which they grew into adults, these first humans were placed in an area where they could be contained and not leave. Sitchin believed it was only when they grew up to be useful enough to the Anunnaki that they were transported to the mining area in Africa. However, I would like to fully acknowledge that there's some discrepancy in this idea, because the story of Enki and Ninmah specifically says, Ninmah took clay from the top of the Abzu in her hand, and she fashioned from it first a man who could not bend his outstretched weak hands. The use of the location Abzu here suggests that the creation of humanity actually took place in Africa, which also aligns significantly better with the mitochondrial Eve discovery that we looked at earlier. Perhaps then it's just the other way around, and that after fashioning these servants, they were found useful to the Anunnaki in other ways than mining, and they were transported to Mesopotamia to help work in and maintain Eridu, or other locations nearby. Either way, it's believed that the location where these slaves worked in Mesopotamia was a place called Eden, which is the root word for the biblical Garden of Eden. There's a few ideas about this translation though. Today, most modern scholars translate the Sumerian term Eden as steppe or plain, suggesting it refers to a large field, I guess. Sitchin, on the other hand, translated Eden to mean home or abode of the righteous ones. At any rate, it's what happened in this location where things get intense. A dispute was growing betwixt the gods. You see, Enlil is often described as the oppressor of humanity, a bit of a patriarchal overlord who commanded the slaves. Enlil is said not to really care about humanity. He just wants to mine gold, destroy humanity, and return home. The tablets even say that he orchestrates a massive flood to wipe out humanity, a subject we'll get to shortly. Enki, on the other hand, is described as humanity's champion. Enki cares about humanity and sees them like his children. And while they'd been producing all of these sterile slave humans to mine gold and till the fields and all of that, in secret, he has been continually refining and developing the human genome to produce the perfect human, one who is capable of reproduction and living as its own sovereign species. The stories say that Enki finally discovers the perfect genetic pairing and that a real human is achieved. Now, on the subject of the creation of these first humans and this land of Eden, there are two Sumerian myths that I'd love to share with you now. The first being Enki and Ninhursag, and the second being the Atrahasis. Now, the story of Enki and Ninhursag is a bit long, so we're just gonna summarize the essence of it here. Basically, in the story, there is a paradise land called Dilmun. The story begins with what you might call not safe for work content. So we'll just gloss over that and say that eventually, Enki eats 8 unique plants in this sacred paradise land. Unfortunately, the goddess Ninhursag considers this act to be a terrible sin, and so she causes 8 of Enki's body parts, including one of his ribs, to suffer. Soon he is on the brink of death. Enlil, along with a magical talking fox who I'm imagining was just adorable, takes up Enki's cause and persuades Ninhursag to relent. Ninhursag returns to Enki and asks him 8 times, "My brother, what part of you hurts you?" And he responds with the various parts of his body. As Ninhursag heals his body, 8 different deities emerge in the healing process. And the one who emerges in the healing of his rib is the goddess Ninti, whose name means both Lady of the Rib and Lady who makes life. Now, as you can tell, there are tremendous parallels to the story of Eve being created from Adam's rib in Genesis 2, as this is its likely origin. Further, Eve in Hebrew is Chawa, and it's most commonly believed to mean living one or source of life. What I find especially interesting about this is that in the Sumerian story, the characters on who Adam and Eve are based on are both deities. While the name Adam comes from Adamu, the character seems to be based on Enki, and Eve's name relating to life and being born of Adam's rib fully links her with Ninti. Now, the second story I mentioned, the Atrahasis, essentially begins as the Enuma Elish ends, with the need of servants for the gods. Instead of Kingu, however, an Anunnaki named We-Lu, also Lawela, volunteers to be killed for the use of his blood, and his flesh, blood, and intelligence are kneaded into clay by the mother goddess Ninhursag. With this mixture, she creates 7 male and 7 female human beings all at the same time. These 14 new creatures are exceptionally fertile, and soon there are hundreds and then thousands of people on the earth, all doing the work which once occupied the Anunnaki workers. The story goes on to say that the humans grew noisy and obnoxious and disturbs Enlil to the point that he decides to destroy them all. Didn't Apsu and Tiamat have the same challenge with their children? I guess history truly is doomed to repeat itself, unless we can learn from the mistakes of our past. Anyways, the significant part of this story is that it says that they produced the men and the women at the same time. It's important to note this because for thousands of years we've been taught by the religious institutions of the world that the man came first, and this idea seems to pervade through our patriarchal society in a rather uncomfortable way. I hope that today, as we become aware of these older stories, we might come to have a deeper understanding within us that we are all truly equal, and the patriarchy can fade into a society that respects and honors all sexes equally. Returning to the main story, we saw Enki and Ninhursag had been toying with the genetics until they could create a perfect being, one who could reproduce and think for themselves. The moment they did, it marked a huge turning point for everything, because the success of this experiment changes the human genome to enlighten mankind. But as mentioned before, this was the beginning of a huge problem, because Enlil did not want humanity to become a sovereign species of their own. He had plans to make little robot people to work for him, and then he would outright destroy them. When he found out what Enki had done, he was furious and exiled the humans from the Anunnaki settlements. Now, here's something I think you're really going to enjoy. In the first episode of Ancient Civilizations, Greg Braden explained something that is positively mind-blowing, a discovery found within our own DNA that we simply must know about. Check this out.
Shedding new light on these creation stories is with the mystery of human chromosome number 2. Human chromosome number 2 is the second largest chromosome in the human body. It forms about 8% of the DNA in every cell. And what makes it such a mystery is that it appears to be the result of an ancient fusion of pre-existing chromosomes from primates that have been fused in a very precise way, and the fusion site has been modified and stabilized so that human chromosome number 2 is optimized for us today. This has happened in a way that cannot be explained by evolution as we know it today. Now, why is this important? Human chromosome number 2 contains the genes that largely set us apart from all other forms of life. The cortex of the human brain that gives us the ability for things like logic, empathy, sympathy, compassion, the ability to consciously trigger conscious states of self-healing within our bodies. These are possible because of what has happened with human chromosome number 2.
Could chromosome number 2 be the work of a master geneticist, otherwise known as Enki from the Sumerian text?
With this revelation, the tablets give us a significantly different perspective of the Garden of Eden story and our origins. At this time, I have to encourage you to really practice looking at this next part openly without judgment or fear, because there are deep roots within our psyche from generations of institutional Judaism and Christianity that have essentially indoctrinated us into believing a very specific ideology. For example, the serpent in the Garden of Eden is said to be Satan. Generally, if you suggest an alternate interpretation to this, people naturally assume you must be evil yourself. So with that as a disclaimer, we get to see that the myths on which the Garden of Eden story was based actually suggests that the character who eventually was written to be the snake was really freeing us from our captivity. It was due to Enki's modification that we tasted a form of knowledge that we were not previously capable of comprehending. Thinking for ourselves, becoming self-aware, and capable of doing anything because we're no longer running on the Anunnaki programs, but our own unique consciousness. However, this also came at a price. We were capable of doing anything, including experience both good and evil within us. And so it was written, we tasted the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. Perhaps this is why the snake was written to be Satan in the creation of the Old Testament, because they had stories of paradise and gods from the ancient history, and the authors naturally assumed that the exile from the Garden of Eden was a punishment. In a way, it was, because we had to learn to fend for ourselves from now on. But ultimately, that would bring us to, over the next thousands and thousands of years, evolve our consciousness higher and higher and become the beings that we are today. The beautiful thing is, we are still growing, and one day we will evolve to the point where we will know and understand that we are all connected, and we will travel and explore the universe and experience a life almost unimaginable to us today. Now, I've got one more fun thing I wish to share with you. Genesis 3:8 says, "Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, 'Where are you?' He answered, 'I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid.' And he said, 'Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?'" Okay, let's break this down. First, God is walking through the garden. He's walking, implying he has a physical body. In this classic scene, God is walking through the garden calling for Adam and Eve. He doesn't know where they are. Wait. He's God, but he doesn't know where Adam and Eve are? He calls for them and they come. He doesn't know that they ate the fruit until he sees them trying to hide themselves because they are ashamed. It is only then that he realizes what they've done. Now, is it just me, or is it a little curious that a being considered an omnipotent creator deity would both have a body, misplace his creations, and then not know what they've been up to while he was out? On top of that, the name used for God in the original Hebrew Bible is Elohim, and this is a word which is actually not singular. It's plural. It gives support to the idea that the God the Bible is describing was not a singular being, but a race of beings, or at least multiple physical beings. And as we saw earlier, when Enlil found out what Enki had done, he was furious. But regardless of what Enlil had commanded, human beings were created, and this set them on a path. Humanity stepped into a new beginning, free of slavery and into a journey of self-discovery. What's more amazing is that all of this was inscribed in the Sumerian tablets over 2,000 years before the Bible was ever written down. Hey everyone, if you like this video and want to go deeper into all of this stuff, check out Ancient Civilizations on Gaia. It's a wonderful series with tons of information. Peace and love. See you next time. The story of Mu, commonly known today as Lemuria, is one which has existed in legends and myths across the Pacific for countless generations. It is a story of an ancient motherland of mankind, an early home for humanity in a distant, long-forgotten past. This story speaks of an age of innocence when our young species began to explore life free of slavery. Yet, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for this young species. For just as Lemuria rose from the depths of the ocean, it would also eventually sink. Will the Lemurians be okay? Find out next time on Spirit Science, the legend of Mu.